Deep inside a cave in Oregon, archaeologists discovered something that shouldn't exist. 2 tiny pieces of animal hide, stitched together with thread, waiting silently for 12,000 years. But here's the thing that shook the scientific world. This wasn't just any needlework. This was proof that our ancestors possessed skills we thought they didn't have for another 10,000 years. And it was hiding in a museum collection the whole time. When we think about ancient civilizations, we imagine pyramids, temples, and grand monuments. We think of people who struggled to survive, who barely managed to keep themselves alive through raw instinct and brute force. But what if everything we believed about our ancestors was fundamentally incomplete? What if the real story of human innovation happened not in the sunlight, but in the darkness of caves, preserved by dry conditions and forgotten for millennia? In February 2026, a team of researchers published findings that would reshape our entire understanding of Ice Age technology. These weren't Hollywood blockbuster discoveries or legendary treasures. They were fragments, scraps, pieces so small that most people wouldn't even notice them. But these fragments told a story that had been hidden since long before recorded history. A story about human beings who possessed remarkable sophistication during one of Earth's harshest periods. The story begins in Oregon's Great Basin, a vast region known for its arid landscape and sagebrush valleys. Between isolated mountains lies an ecosystem unlike anywhere else in North America. And hidden within this landscape are caves, not tourist attractions with guided tours and gift shops, but ancient rock shelters that have protected secrets for longer than civilization has existed. One of these caves is called Cougar Mountain Cave, and it would become the centerpiece of a discovery that challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about human capabilities during the Pleistocene era. The artifacts weren't found recently. That's part of what makes this story fascinating. An amateur archaeologist named John Cowles discovered these pieces in 1958. He was exploring the cave, carefully excavating, and he found items made of materials that almost never survive thousands of years. Animal hide, plant fibers, bone, cordage. He collected them carefully and kept them in his personal collection. For years, these artifacts sat in his possession, treated as curiosities, as interesting finds from a distant past, but nothing revolutionary. When John Cowles died in 1985, his collection didn't disappear into obscurity. It was donated to the Favell Museum in Klamath Falls, Oregon, where it remained. Years passed, decades passed. The artifacts were stored, cataloged, and largely forgotten. Nobody was looking at them with particular urgency. Nobody was thinking, these might be the most important evidence of ancient human technology ever discovered. They were just old things in a museum, artifacts from the Ice Age, interesting perhaps, but not immediately recognized as world-changing. Then, in recent years, a researcher named Richard Rosenkrantz from the University of Nevada decided to take a closer look at Cowles' collection. He wasn't searching for something revolutionary. He was conducting research into early human adaptations in the Great Basin region. But when he and his team examined these pieces of hide, when they subjected them to advanced analysis, they realized they were looking at something extraordinary. These weren't just scraps of ancient leather. These were pieces of hide that had been deliberately sewn together using thread made from twisted plant fiber and animal hair. Radiocarbon dating was applied to confirm the age. The results came back between 11,700 and 12,900 years ago. The hide pieces had been radiocarbon dated 3 separate times to be absolutely certain. Every single test confirmed the same age. This was 12,000 years old. This was the oldest known sewn hide ever discovered anywhere on Earth. This was the earliest physical evidence that human beings possessed the technology and the knowledge to join materials using needle and thread. Think about what that means. We're not talking about sophisticated civilizations with written language and organized governments. We're not talking about people living in comfortable environments with predictable seasons and abundant resources. We're talking about human beings living during the Younger Dryas, a period of dramatic climate reversal. The warming trend at the end of the Ice Age suddenly halted. The world became cold and dry, temperatures plummeted, snow fell in regions that had begun to thaw. Conditions became some of the most hostile that humanity had ever faced on the North American continent. And yet, in these conditions, people in Oregon developed complex sewing technology. They weren't simply wrapping themselves in animal hides and hoping for the best. They were carefully cutting hides into pieces. They were crafting thread. They were joining these pieces together with deliberate stitches, creating fitted clothing that would provide superior protection against extreme cold. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't primitive. This was innovation born from necessity, from intelligence, from the human capacity to solve problems and create solutions. Richard Rosenkrantz assembled an international research team. Caitlin McDonough from the University of Oregon joined him. Together, they conducted a comprehensive analysis of not just these hide pieces, but of an entire collection of artifacts from Cougar Mountain Cave and another nearby site called Paisley Caves. They examined 55 different items made from organic materials like plant fiber, bone, and hide. They obtained 66 radiocarbon dates. They used zooarchaeological methods to identify which animals the materials came from. They applied mass spectrometry and other advanced analytical techniques. The research was rigorous, thorough, and peer-reviewed. What emerged from this analysis was a picture of a sophisticated culture that understood how to work with multiple materials and create complex implements. The bone needles alone were remarkable. Researchers found 14 of these needles across 4 different sites. These weren't crude, sharp objects. They were carefully carved, with actual eyes drilled through the top to hold thread, exactly like modern sewing needles. Some were carved from bison bone. Others came from mountain sheep bone. The craftsmanship was evident. These were made by people who understood precision and design. The cord recovered from these sites showed incredible variety. Different types of cord with different thicknesses and qualities suggested that they were manufactured for different purposes. Some cord was likely used for sewing, while other cord might have been used for nets, for bindings, or for other applications. The people who made this cord understood material properties. They understood that different tasks required different tools and materials, and this wasn't random experimentation. This was applied knowledge being passed down and refined. But what about the hide itself? The elk hide piece that had been carefully preserved in the dry conditions of Cougar Mountain Cave was remarkable for another reason. The hide wasn't just raw animal skin. It showed clear evidence of being worked and processed, and most importantly, it showed evidence of stitching. 2 small pieces of hide had been deliberately joined together using cordage made from plant fiber and animal hair twisted together. A knot tied in the cord held the pieces securely. Whoever did this work understood the basic principles of sewing, and they understood how to create joints that would hold fabric together under stress. Scientists examined the preserved hide fragments and determined that they came from a North American elk. The hide itself had been carefully cut into pieces. The edges had been prepared. The cord had been passed through the edges in deliberate stitches. This wasn't the work of someone experimenting randomly. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had likely done this many times before, someone who had refined the technique through practice and experience. The hide pieces suggest that this technology had already existed for some time before these particular pieces were created. We're looking at the oldest known evidence, but not necessarily the origin point. What would these sewn hides have been used for? Archaeologists and researchers can only speculate based on the evidence. They might have been part of clothing, perhaps a coat or jacket tailored to fit the human body. They might have been parts of footwear, pieces of boot or moccasin designed to protect against snow and ice. They could have been sections of a shelter, perhaps a tent or windbreak made from hide and held together with stitched seams. The small size of the surviving pieces makes it impossible to know for certain what the complete object looked like or how it functioned. But whatever it was, it represented advanced technology adapted to an extremely hostile environment. The timing is crucial to understanding this discovery. The hide pieces date to the Younger Dryas, specifically between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago. This was one of the most dramatic climate events in human history. After thousands of years of gradual warming following the end of the last glacial maximum, temperatures suddenly reversed. The climate returned to Ice Age conditions. Average temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere fell by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Snow began to accumulate in regions where it had already been melting. Lakes and rivers that had been growing larger began to shrink. Precipitation patterns changed. The landscape transformed back into something far more severe and challenging than it had been just centuries before. This timing is not accidental. The development of sophisticated sewing technology appears to have coincided directly with the need for superior cold weather clothing. When the climate shifted, when temperatures plummeted, the people living in Oregon needed better protection. They couldn't simply wrap themselves in raw hides and expect to survive the cold. They needed fitted garments that would trap body heat and shed wind and snow. The sewing technology found in Cougar Mountain Cave represents an adaptive response to climate crisis. It shows that human beings, even 12,000 years ago, could innovate rapidly in response to environmental challenges. The research team found additional evidence that supports this interpretation. Bone needles appear to have been used frequently during the period of extreme cold, but their use seems to decline after around 11,000 years ago, when the climate began to warm again. This suggests a technological shift. As conditions improved and the need for tailored hide clothing decreased, people may have began transitioning toward woven plant textiles instead. This represents not just adaptation to environment, but evolution of technology over time. It shows a progression of human innovation spanning thousands of years. Evidence of rabbit bone in the collections suggests another layer of technological sophistication. Rabbit fur was being used in clothing and cordage production. The presence of small bone fragments suggests that rabbits were being systematically harvested, probably using large nets and communal drives. These weren't random hunting incidents. These were organized food and resource procurement activities, people working together to capture rabbits, which provided both meat and fur for clothing production. Wooden artifacts that appeared to be trap triggers suggested that small mammals were also being caught individually using engineered traps. This was a culture with multiple strategies for obtaining both food and the raw materials needed for clothing production. The wooden artifacts themselves deserved attention. Finding preserved wood from 12,000 years ago is extremely rare. Organic materials simply don't survive that long. But in dry caves, when conditions remain consistently dry for millennia, preservation can be remarkable. Wooden items in the Cougar Mountain Cave collection showed evidence of careful carving and purposeful design. Some appeared to be components of traps or snares. Others might have served other functions entirely. But their very survival provided a window into a material culture that we almost never get to glimpse. The botanical materials found alongside the artifacts were equally valuable. Plant remains from 12,000 years ago provide evidence about diet, about resource use, and about the environment of that time. The presence of certain plant species suggests what the landscape looked like. Plant fiber used in cordage production tells us what plants were being exploited for materials. Seeds and plant fragments tell us what foods were being consumed. All of this evidence together created a fuller picture of what daily life was actually like for these people during the Younger Dryas. It's important to understand why this discovery is so significant to the scientific community. Before this evidence emerged, our understanding of ancient human technology in North America was based primarily on stone tools. We could find arrowheads, scrapers, and other implements made from stone because stone survives. But most of what ancient people created was made from perishable materials. Clothing was made from hide, plant fiber, and fur. Containers were made from plant materials. Shelters were made from wood and hide. Cords and nets and bags were made from fiber. Most of the material culture of ancient peoples simply doesn't survive the passage of thousands of years. In the Great Basin, however, the dry climate provides an exception. The low humidity and the protection of caves allow organic materials to persist. This gives researchers an extraordinary opportunity to study the complete material culture of ancient peoples, not just the stone tools that normally survive. The artifacts from Cougar Mountain Cave and Paisley caves provide evidence of technologies that were completely unknown to us before. Not because they didn't exist, but because the evidence rarely survives for us to find. These dry caves opened a window onto a world that we had previously only glimpsed through speculation and educated guessing. The research published in Science Advances represented the culmination of careful, methodical work. The paper documented the analysis of 55 artifacts made from organic materials. 66 radiocarbon dates were obtained from 55 of these items, representing 15 different plant and animal species. The dates were consistent and reliable, obtained through accelerator mass spectrometry, a technique that can date individual artifacts rather than relying on the dating of surrounding soil or sediment. This meant the researchers could be confident in the age of the artifacts themselves, not just the layers in which they were found. The bone needles were studied using multiple techniques. Zooarchaeological analysis determined the species from which the bone came. Microscopic examination revealed details of how the needles had been carved and finished. The eye of each needle was carefully examined to understand how thread would have been passed through it. Some needles showed signs of wear patterns consistent with actual use in sewing. Others appeared to be more freshly made. Together, they provided evidence of a sustained tradition of bone needle production spanning hundreds of years. The cordage analysis revealed distinct types and qualities of cord, suggesting specialized production for different purposes. Some cord was tightly twisted and strong, suitable for holding under tension during sewing or binding. Other cord was more loosely constructed, possibly used for wrapping or binding purposes where extreme strength wasn't necessary. The plant fiber and animal hair were carefully examined under magnification to understand how they had been processed and twisted together with remarkable consistency. This represented craft knowledge that could only come from years of experience and deliberate practice. Making cord from fiber and hair requires deep understanding of material properties and considerable manual skill that would have taken time to develop and master. The variety of cord types suggests a culture that understood different tools for different jobs. The hide pieces themselves underwent multiple examinations. Chemical analysis determined the species of the animal, confirming it was North American elk. The hide was examined for evidence of how it had been processed before sewing. Traditional hide working involves scraping away the tissue and fat, then treating the skin to make it flexible. The preserved hide showed signs consistent with this processing. The edges had been carefully prepared for sewing. The stitches were regular and deliberate. This was professional level work, the product of skilled craftsmanship. When we consider all this evidence together, a picture emerges of a culture far more sophisticated than we had previously understood. These were not primitive people struggling for survival. These were skilled artisans and craftspeople who understood how to work with multiple materials and create specialized implements. These were organized communities capable of conducting communal activities like rabbit drives. These were innovators who responded to climate crisis by developing new technologies. These were people who possessed knowledge that was refined and transmitted across generations. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond ancient Oregon. It forces us to reconsider our assumptions about how human culture developed and spread. If people in Oregon possessed advanced sewing technology 12,000 years ago, it raises questions about how widespread such knowledge was. Did other cultures in different regions possess similar or different technologies? How did these techniques develop? Were they invented independently in multiple locations, or did knowledge spread through human migration and contact? The discovery opens up entirely new research questions that archaeologists will be investigating for decades to come. It also challenges the narrative that human progress follows a linear path from simple to complex. In our modern understanding, we often think of technological advancement as a steady march forward, Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age to modern times. But the evidence from Oregon suggests a more complex picture. People in extreme environments needed sophisticated solutions. They developed those solutions. When environmental conditions changed, they adapted their technologies in response. When climate improved, they shifted to different materials and techniques. This wasn't a simple progression, but rather a dynamic adaptation to changing circumstances. The discovery also highlights the importance of museums and collections. John Cowles discovered these artifacts in 1958, but they didn't reach their full significance until 60-plus years later when different researchers examined them with modern analytical techniques. This isn't unusual in archaeology. Many museum collections contain items that haven't yet been fully analyzed. As technology improves and new questions emerge, old collections can suddenly become relevant in new ways. This reinforces the importance of preserving artifacts carefully and maintaining detailed records about where and how they were found. The dry caves of the Great Basin continue to be productive archaeological sites. Beyond Cougar Mountain Cave and Paisley Caves, other sites in the region have yielded important evidence. Conley Caves, Smith Creek Cave, and Bonneville Estates Rock Shelter have all contributed evidence to our understanding of ancient Great Basin cultures. Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter, located outside of Riley, Oregon, has yielded evidence of human occupation going back 18,000 years. These sites work together to create a comprehensive picture of human adaptation to the Great Basin across vast spans of time. The research team that conducted this study brought together expertise from multiple universities and disciplines. This kind of collaborative approach is increasingly common in modern archaeology. No single researcher knows everything. By bringing together specialists in different areas, researchers can ask better questions and provide more comprehensive answers. The team included bone specialists who could identify and analyze the needles, fiber experts who could understand the cordage, hide specialists who could interpret the processing and use of skins, and radiocarbon dating specialists who could establish the chronology with precision. The peer review process added additional scrutiny to the findings. Before publication in Science Advances, the research was examined by multiple expert reviewers who could challenge the methodology, question the interpretations, and ensure that the evidence supported the conclusions. This rigorous vetting process is essential to maintaining scientific integrity and credibility. The reviewers scrutinized every claim, examined the dating methodology, questioned the interpretations of artifacts, and verified that the conclusions logically followed from the evidence presented. This process led to revisions and refinements of the paper, making it stronger and more convincing. The final published paper represents not just the researchers' work, but a genuine consensus among scientific experts that these findings are valid, significant, and worthy of publication in one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals. The public presentation of these findings also matters. Press releases, news articles, interviews with researchers, and public discussions help bring scientific discoveries to the broader audience. The media coverage of the Oregon cave discovery helped people understand why this matters, why it's significant, and what it tells us about our ancestors. Of course, sensationalized headlines might overstate the case or misrepresent the findings, but the core message came through. Ancient people were more sophisticated than we had realized. Looking at this discovery within the broader context of recent archaeological findings reveals an emerging pattern. Researchers are increasingly finding evidence that challenges our assumptions about ancient peoples. In Peru, evidence of coastal fishing villages dating back 15,000 years suggests maritime adaptation at the end of the Ice Age. In Chile, evidence at Monteverde shows human occupation dating back 14,500 years. In the Mediterranean, underwater archaeology reveals the existence of ancient trade networks and coastal settlements. Around the world, new discoveries are showing that human populations were more widespread, more mobile, and more sophisticated than previously thought. The Oregon cave discovery fits into this larger picture. It suggests that even in challenging environments, even at the end of the Ice Age, human beings possessed remarkable capabilities. We were tool makers, clothing makers, container makers, and innovators. We worked with multiple materials and developed specialized knowledge. We organized ourselves to conduct complex activities like communal hunting drives. We responded to environmental challenges by developing new technologies. We created beauty and functional design simultaneously. These aspects of human nature were evident not just in recorded history, but in the deep past, in the Ice Age itself. It also reminds us that our ancestors weren't aliens or fundamentally different from us. They had the same basic cognitive abilities. They could learn, remember, teach, innovate, and solve problems. The difference between us and them wasn't one of capability, but of accumulated knowledge. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Everything they learned, their descendants could build upon. Everything they discovered, future generations could improve. Over thousands of years, accumulated innovations led to the complex civilization we live in today. The discovery from Cougar Mountain Cave also has implications for understanding human migration and adaptation to the Americas. The prevailing theory for many decades held that humans arrived in the Americas relatively recently, perhaps only 15,000 years ago, and that their initial populations were small. But evidence like this suggests that these early Americans were highly adaptable, capable of surviving in diverse environments and developing sophisticated technologies. The presence of advanced sewing technology in Oregon shows that people could make the cold Great Basin habitable. Similar adaptive capacities likely helped humans spread throughout the Americas more rapidly than previously assumed. For future research, the Oregon discoveries open numerous avenues of investigation. Researchers might conduct experimental archaeology, actually attempting to make hide garments and cordage using the techniques that the ancient evidence suggests. This could help us understand the time investment required, the level of skill needed, and the actual performance characteristics of these garments in cold weather. Studies of contemporary indigenous peoples in the region might reveal traditional knowledge about clothing production that reflects ancient practices, passed down through generations. DNA analysis of the preserved organic materials might provide information about the specific animals and plants used. The broader application of what we've learned from these discoveries is significant. In an era of climate change and environmental uncertainty, we can look to the example of these ancient people. When their climate shifted dramatically, they responded with innovation. They didn't simply accept their circumstances. They developed new technologies that allowed them to survive and thrive in harsh conditions. This adaptive capacity, this drive to innovate in response to challenges, is a fundamental human trait. It's part of who we are as a species. Understanding our deep history reminds us of this capacity and perhaps gives us hope in facing our own environmental challenges. The story of the Oregon Cave also demonstrates the importance of continued archaeological research and funding. These discoveries don't happen automatically. They require skilled researchers, careful excavation, proper conservation of artifacts, access to museum collections, and investment in advanced analytical techniques like radiocarbon dating and mass spectrometry. They require multiple disciplines working together and careful peer review ensuring quality. They require the long-term commitment to understanding our past. When societies cut funding for archaeology and humanities research, they're choosing to give up these opportunities to learn about ourselves. In conclusion, the tiny pieces of sewn hide hidden in Oregon caves for 12,000 years represent far more than just ancient artifacts. They represent the resilience of human innovation. They show us that our ancestors possessed sophistication and skill. They demonstrate that human beings have always been capable of responding to environmental challenges through creativity and invention. They remind us that technology is not a modern invention, but something humans have been pursuing since the Ice Age. And they suggest that the true story of human civilization is far richer and more complex than we had previously understood. These small scraps of leather, preserved by chance in dry caves, have opened a window onto the deep human past and shown us who we really are. This is the story written not in stone or gold, but in the materials our ancestors created to survive. This is the story of human ingenuity emerging from the Ice Age itself.